you guys, happy Thursday. I promised you I would do an episode on the JFK files. Well, this is just the beginning of it. And what I can tell you guys in a sentence is that the conspiracy theorists, we were right again. Always, it seems, nowadays. Tucker Carlson was definitely on the money when he said that being referred to as a conspiracy theorist these days just means that you're educated, like beyond the mainstream media and the public education system, which is making everybody dumb. So for those of you guys who have not read Chaos yet and are not a member of our book club, we are going to take you down the JFK rabbit hole, the beginning of it. Welcome back to Candace. All right, guys, the JFK files have been cracked open. What does it mean? Well, what it means right now is that if you are a Jewish American citizen, it is really high time for you guys to understand that you are under no obligation to keep defending the state of Israel, okay? Anti-Semitism is not happening when people judge the foreign state of Israel. We have to say that right at the top. I should make everybody right now just get up and do the Pledge of Allegiance, like old-fashioned style, like you're just in your fifth grade classroom. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, not under Israel, not under blackmail, okay? Like, we're all the same. We are Americans. And the only reason that you have that instinct, especially the Jewish Americans, is because there's this existential crisis that has been ingrained in you since your youth. Like, you have been indoctrinated to believe that supporting that state is existential, really. Like, you're going to die if you don't. And we all have those things. It's cool. We've all been indoctrinated in some way or another in our youth. And that's kind of the social engineering of the classroom to make us really fearful. It's the reason why women are like, I support Planned Parenthood because I think men are going to take my ovaries if I don't. And then you kind of get older and you're like, wait a second, that doesn't really make any sense. Why do I fear the patriarchy? It's just a fear-based education system. Anyways, let's get to the beginning of it, really, and kind of make you understand where the conspiracy theorists were coming from since before these files got released. Okay, so we all know what happened on November 22nd, 1963. JFK was shot. President JFK was shot sitting alongside his wife in a vehicle that was traveling through the streets of Dallas. Now, it is important before we get into that you have a historical understanding of some other facts. Before Kennedy was elected president, Eisenhower was president. And right before Eisenhower left office, he warned the American public that a shadow was building, a shadow government, so to speak, was building in the background. He referred to it as a military-industrial complex. I want you to take a close listen to his words here.
We annually spend on military alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
So he's giving this warning, and it's interesting because obviously many of us were not alive during this time. Many of us who were alive during this time certainly wouldn't maybe recall that speech, but he's saying that this is new. Like, this idea of America always being at war is new, and it's not new to us. It's just like, we can't stop being at war in the Middle East, Ukraine. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. Like, the military-industrial complex is obviously real, and it exists, and we refer to this now as the deep state. And you should know that when JFK became president thereafter, he was explicitly against war. You have to understand, he too agreed that there was no need for us to be engaged in never-ending war. We're supposed to win World War II. And it turns out that there was something operating in the background that didn't really want that. And so Eisenhower's warning that these people could have undue influence, whatever this magic force is in the background, could have undue influence on American policy. And Kennedy gets in office and he's like, I'm not about this war. Take a listen to what he had to say at American University. This speech was given on June 10th, 1963, just a few months before he was assassinated.
I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears, but we have no more urgent task. Some say that it is useless to speak of peace or world law or world disarmament, and that it will be useless until the leaders of the Soviet Union adopt a more enlightened attitude. I hope they do. I believe we can help them do it. But I also believe that we must re-examine our own attitudes as individuals and as a nation, for our attitude is as essential as theirs.
So the question that we should ask is, why is it that as soon as you begin speaking about JFK, people refer to you as a conspiracy theorist? And in particular, you will notice that there are these Zionist accounts that freak out before they even know what you're going to say. So what is it about JFK's assassination that triggers Zionists? Why do they pretend that it's an act of anti-Semitism to explore the environment and the things that JFK was adamantly opposed to? I'm going to describe that to you, and I'm going to use only Jewish sources here, so we can remove ourselves from any claims of anti-Semitism. These are just the facts of what JFK was fighting while he was in office, okay? One of the things that he was opposed to was the American Zionist Council. He wanted them, which would go on to become AIPAC. We're still having a discussion about AIPAC's undue influence in our elections today. They were back then known as the American Zionist Council, and JFK's Department of Justice told them that they had to register as a foreign agent under FARA, okay? Now, I'm going to slow that down for you because many of you probably don't even know what FARA is. It stands for the Foreign Agents Registration Act. It requires that any person or business entity that is accepting money from or acting as an agent to a foreign government must register with the Department of Justice. Now, you would have to, that means file reports. You'd have to detail your compensation. You have to detail your expenditures, your communications. Essentially, the reason for that is obvious, so that we as Americans know that we are being influenced by agents of another government. I personally wish that we would also be able to see this in terms of like right away knowing when people are lobbying that they would have to announce that we are lobbying on behalf of Big Pharma and we accept money from them, but they don't have to do that, right? And so it would color your imagination, obviously, if I'm saying all these things and you find out that I'm registered under FARA for a foreign country like Ukraine, you would go, okay, well, that makes sense. Candace is telling me that we should go to war with Ukraine, but I now know that Candace is actually accepting tens of millions of dollars from Ukraine. That's the purpose of FARA registration. So when the American Zionist Council came into fruition in 1949, they were lobbying on behalf of the newly formed foreign state of Israel, okay? And the JFK said, you guys now need to register under FARA. Now, again, I've explained why that would be important, because it would change the way that you understood the news that was coming to you. You essentially would understand you were listening to a commercial. And sometimes you wonder, when you see all these influencers, you're like, who's funding them? That natural question of who is funding them. It would be infinitely more important if you knew that it was somebody, it was a foreign country overseas. So we're going to take a lead up. We're going to take a look at, rather, the lead up to JFK's assassinations and his dealings with the Zionist group that he was trying to get to register under FARA. Look at this website, okay? This website, and I wouldn't have a top of this. I want to know, Skylar, if you don't mind, actually showing the Israel Lobby Archive. Okay, so I'm going to take you through just a timeline, and you can actually click and see these documents. These are documents that are published publicly. They all actually exist. And I'm going to take you through the relevant things leading up to the year of the communications that his Department of Justice, JFK's Department of Justice, had with the AZC saying, hey, you need to register as a foreign agent. So we'll go back a year before his assassination on October 31st, 1962. You can see that the Assistant Attorney General and the Director of Internal Security, who was J. Walter Yeagley, notifies Attorney General R.F. Kennedy that we are soliciting next week the registration of the American Zionist Council under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. You may be aware that the American Zionist Council is composed of representatives of the various Zionist organizations in the United States, including the Zionist Organization of America. Excuse me. So there were a bunch of different organizations. They were all lobbying on behalf of Israel. And they were like, we're going to obviously pursue this. On November 21st, 1962, this is again like almost exactly a year before he gets assassinated, the Department of Justice ordered them, the AZC, to register under FARA. And there was a receipt of such funds from the American section of the Jewish Agency for Israel, constitutes the council. And essentially they were like, you absolutely must register. Your request is happening. And Sky, I don't know if you've actually pulled any of these documents in, but if not, it's okay. We'll keep going down the timeline. Now, on December 6th of that same year, the president of AZC was a guy named Rabbi Irving Miller, and he responded to the Department of Justice, and he wrote this: the request for registration contained in your letter raises many questions of fact and of relationships, which first must be resolved by us before compliance can be made. Therefore, it is requested that you be good enough to grant us a delay of 120 days. Immediately already stunning, okay? The Department of Justice is saying to you in a letter, you need to register as a foreign agent, and you have the rabbi who's leading this group who says, your request is a little, we're going to need some time actually to chew over that request, and you'll understand we need 120 days, okay? So within that 120-day time frame, they decided to officially incorporate AIPAC. On January 2nd, 1963, a man named Isaiah incorporated AIPAC instead. And then the AZC Council went back to the DOJ and it essentially said, like, you know, we're not ready actually to register, but now we have a new organization. It's known as AIPAC. And if you follow along on this timeline, so then you start to see that he incorporates, that's on January 2nd, 1963, Isaiah incorporates the American Israel Public Affairs, like I said, AIPAC committee in Washington, D.C. And then the day after, on January 24th, 1963, a couple of weeks after pardon, the DOJ draft file memo, they essentially say that they met with the AZC head counsel, and he had advised his client to just discontinue the previous agency as AZC. And they were like, we hope that that resolves the issue. Like, basically, we are a new incorporated AIPAC, and that should resolve the issue. And essentially, the DOJ said, no, that actually doesn't resolve the issue, and we're still going to need you to register, essentially saying, we need your expenditures. We need to know who's funding you guys, where this money is coming from, and we're not going to change our opinion on that. And they were still fighting him. They still were fighting and going, we're not going to give that to you whatsoever. What you have taking place there on January 25th, 1963, is you start to see these articles that start building in the press. And so they started creating a peer pressure campaign, essentially saying, and this is like a direct quote from the Wall Street Journal, that if they had gone through with this, if they kept demanding for the AZC to have to reveal to them their expenditures and who was funding them, that Jewish opinion would be bad for the DOJ, like that the American Jewish opinion was going to be bad, so they shouldn't go through with this. This was actually happening. And incredibly, even Donald Rumsfeld, who was a congressman at that time, wrote to the DOJ and said, I'm concerned that if you keep pushing this matter, then the Jewish Zionist opinion is going to transform in America. Absolutely wild. Like, this is the Department of Justice telling you to register, and now you are essentially lobbying politicians and you're lobbying journalists to start writing these articles and to essentially seed into the American mind and to seed into the political mind that this request is inappropriate. It's entirely inappropriate, because how dare you ask us to register? That doesn't make any sense. Don't you understand that we're Jewish and this isn't going to look good for you? That you can literally go to this website and look through the filings and look through the newspaper clippings, and this is the reality. There was a peer pressure campaign not unlike what we see today. When I speak about AIPAC and I speak about these journalists who act like hitmen, and if you don't acquiesce to whatever it is the state of Israel wants, they are out there calling you Hitler, anti-Semitic. They've got all of these influencers on an orbit online who we can assume are receiving money in some capacity because AIPAC is now a 501c3, and they never had to register as FARA, but they did this right in the beginning. And guess what? FARA came back and said, we don't care. We can bring that up, that timeline. FARA came back and said, we don't care. Okay, that's not going to change anything. You are actually going to still have to register. It doesn't matter how many press articles are written. We are going to interpret this according to the law and not according to the feelings of Jewish Zionists in America. And so they go on, and you go back through this timeline, and it gets more and more aggressive. And finally, what happens is that Hoover, who was heading up the FBI at that time, says, do you want me to get involved? Is it time now for us to swoop in as the FBI and essentially say, you register or else? Like, are we at the point now essentially where we need to make arrests? And they're getting very serious about this because they had already ordered for them to register within 10 days. And they still declined to do it. They still did not move whatsoever. And so they're sort of mulling this over, like, should we get the feds involved at a higher level? Should we get the FBI involved rather? And suddenly, FARA comes back as well and says, like, we absolutely think that we should get them involved. Then you see this, like, measly attempt from the AZC Council to say, well, will it suffice if we show you our income statements? And FARA says, absolutely not. This is absurd. This is a year on now, again, leading up to Kennedy's death. And you can see there on October 11th, 1963, the DOJ demands for AZC to register. The department expects a response from you within 72 hours with regards to this matter. And then you can see on the 17th that Walter Yeagley noted of a DOJ AZC a meeting that they essentially said they were making a plea for no registration, stating it was the opinion of most of the people that were affiliated with the council that such a registration would be so publicized by the American Council on Judaism that it would eventually destroy the Zionist movement. Now, I want you to think about that. If all you have to do to be, like, it's not a crime, you can be a foreign agent, right? If all you have to do once you become registered under FARA is to reveal your expenditures, reveal how you are being funded, allow people to understand where you are getting this money from, why would they be this opposed to it? A year on, using lawyers, calling judges to get involved, trying to persuade the public, trying to essentially cause a smear campaign and saying that it's going to radically shift Jewish opinion, that it's going to put the Zionist movement on pause. What would it have plausibly revealed if they had done that? I don't know the answer to this. I'm never going to know the answer to this because what we do know is that a couple of weeks later, JFK got shot. Okay. Now, if you're instantly connecting the dots and going, oh, well, of course, it must have been a Zionist who did this, I think that would be a little bit too far of a stretch. But when you compare the policies of JFK, who did not want them to be funded, and what was running parallel to this, of course, was that he was on the phone arguing, screaming, having fights with Prime Minister Ben-Gurion of Israel, because he also did not want Israel as a state to become nuclearly armed, okay? And they're fighting on the phone. They still won't declassify these arguments that he was having, but they absolutely were at each other's throats and they hated each other. And he was very opposed to the Dimona reactor. This is something that you can even find in speeches like the Gaddafi speech. When he speaks about what really happened to JFK, everybody knows that he was strongly opposed to Israel and nuclear armament. He kind of just leaves that out there. When you add those two things together, you go, okay, well, would it be a conspiracy to suggest that Ben-Gurion and the state of Israel hated him and he was opposed to them and he was opposed to them getting funding and he was opposed to them having undue influence in American politics, and then he dies? And then you weigh that against the fact that the problem for them instantly disappeared as soon as JFK died. Because what happened was that when Lyndon B. Johnson got into office, he was the vice president. All of their problems were instantly resolved because he reversed course on everything. What is interesting is that LBJ essentially employed the exact opposite policies of JFK. He was fundamentally pro-war, okay? Vietnam, Cambodia, the bombing campaigns, and it didn't come out until quite recently that he helped Israel get established as a state by secretly helping to transport weapons, exactly what JFK was against, exactly what Eisenhower before him was against. He secretly helped to transport weapons to Israel while he was in Congress. Now, don't take my word for it. If I said that fact, it would be anti-Semitic, right? Let's take that fact instead from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. This is literally an Israeli publication. They publish daily. They wrote, quote, this article you can see is entitled Lyndon Johnson, Israel has had no better friend. Historians generally regard Johnson as the president most uniformly friendly to Israel. And then it says, after John F. Kennedy was killed and Lyndon Johnson became the 36th president, LBJ told an Israeli diplomat, you have lost a very great friend, but you have found a better one. Indeed, it was Johnson, as a Senate Majority Leader who stood in the way years earlier of Dwight Eisenhower's plans to cut off assistance to Israel. Okay, I'm quoting this from the article. It's not from me. So we now know that while he was in Congress, he stood in the way of Eisenhower, who wanted to cut off assistance